When you're creating a D&D adventure for your game, you are probably going to feel the pressure to create something completely unique and original. But you shouldn't put that sort of pressure on yourself. You are not being paid to create a completely original story like a professional writer. And by the way, no professional writer has ever created anything completely original, but that's a topic for another day. But the truth is, your players don't want an original story. Well, let me rephrase. They'll appreciate an original story if you have one, but that's not the primary goal. They want to have fun. That's it. So when you remember that that's your priority, it can help you focus on what's most important in your game. Likewise, your players did not come to your table for a completely faithful rendition of a published adventure, or a 100% accurate adaptation of a piece of lore. Again, that might be something they enjoy, but that's not why they're playing D&D. They want to have fun. And you're a player too, so you should also have fun. You should feel empowered to let go of those expectations. And don't focus on being original at the expense of other things in your game. Even the professional streaming dungeon masters who run their games for money for thousands of people to watch, they don't try to hide their influences.
Leaving these almost like slime cocoons in portions of the wall.
Totally aliens.
Yeah.
They're in the walls, man.
Yeah. Finding my inspiration for this yet?
No.
Fantasy High, where we ask the question that has long gone unasked. What would happen if John Hughes ran a game of a tabletop RPG? And we're going to find out today.
I dreamed I was a god.
And it's fun to take the things that inspire you and put them into your D&D games. So, do it. Seriously. There's no reason not to do exactly that. Now, there are a few things to consider. If you try to take the exact plot of a novel or a movie or a TV show episode and put it into your game, you can't be sure that it's going to play out exactly the way it did in the source material. For example, I once ran a one-shot that was inspired by The Seven Samurai, the Magnificent Seven, that kind of story. And one of the big beats in that story is that the players, the main characters rather, train the townspeople to defend themselves, and they prepare for an attack from the enemies. Arguably, that's the most famous beat of that story. And it did not happen, because the players took the offensive. They decided to go after the bad guys where they laired. Which was fine. I had, I'd prepared nothing, so I pretty much had to wing that part. But if I thought it through and I had planned ahead enough to prepare something, I would have been fine. Or I just would have structured the story differently so that couldn't have happened. I would have put the bad guy's lair somewhere that was inaccessible to the players. Then again, that's easier said than done. The players will always find a way to surprise you. So that's maybe the most important piece of advice I can give you. Don't assume that your players are going to play out the exact plot of a movie, for example. Don't make any specific scenes or story beats dependent on your players doing something that they might not do. Then again, that's always true of D&D. It is a trap that is particularly easy to fall into when you're pulling stories from other media. But if you prep around that, you can still have a lot of fun while using an existing story as your inspiration and your jumping off point. Now, you might also want to hide your influences so your players who have read that book or watched that movie don't necessarily make the connection. But that, I think, is not a hard and fast rule. It depends a lot on your style and the specific adventure that you're running. If knowing the inspiration doesn't spoil the story or any of the twists you have coming up, then there's no reason to hide your work if you don't want to. You probably shouldn't just say, hey guys, I'm doing Jurassic Park, play along. Because I think players like making connections on their own rather than being told what they're expected to do. But again, this is just true of D&D in general. You also don't have to tell them yourself, but if they make the connection on their own, you don't have to hide it. You can just nod and say, yeah, that was a Moana reference. But again, this depends on your game and your style. I've definitely played with DMs who, from my personal taste, very much overdid it on the pop culture references. Sometimes they would drop entire chunks of dialogue into their game and not try to hide it at all. But I'm sure some of my former players would say exactly the same thing about me, so it all falls on a spectrum. It also depends a lot on what you're referencing. The more famous the material you reference, the more everyone is in on the joke, and there's some real value there. But on the other hand, if you can rip off something obscure, then you're going to look like a genius because nobody gets the reference. And by the way, there's no shame in that. Professional screenwriters get paid real money to do that all the time. For example, here is a real line from the Wikipedia page of The Lion King. The Lion King was the first Disney animated feature to be an original story rather than based on pre-existing works and characters. Here's the next sentence. The filmmakers have said that the story of The Lion King was inspired by the lives of Joseph and Moses from the Bible and William Shakespeare's Hamlet. And yeah, it's pretty clearly inspired by Hamlet. The parallels are pretty direct. But knowing that about the movie does not harm your enjoyment of that movie. The movie's amazing. Hot take from Mike Christensen. Lion King good. The first campaign I ever ran for my friends in LA was directly based on Disney movies, and it was a ton of fun. And as the campaign went along, my references got slightly more obscure. Well, I mean, still very obvious if you knew what you were looking for, which by that point, my players did. But I wasn't really trying to hide anything. I was just getting better at using these stories as inspiration rather than one-for-one adaptations of them. The campaign opened with an adventure that went into a dragon slayer's tomb, and that was a Sleeping Beauty reference. Honestly, that's the most subtle the references ever got. Early in the campaign, they went to a castle where everyone who worked and lived there was cursed to look like scary monsters. And then they went to a coastal town where a prince was about to marry a beautiful woman, but also everyone in the town had lost their voices, and then during the wedding they had to fight a kraken. Like I said, not remotely subtle. But later on, they took a trip to the Feywild and met a band of revolutionaries, and I don't know how many of them made the connection that that was inspired by Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. Toward the end, they met an immortal female knight who had been imprisoned in a dungeon for centuries. And that last reference wasn't very obvious until I pointed out that her hair had been growing that entire time. Also, she was imprisoned just like Tai Lung from the DreamWorks movie Kung Fu Panda, because that movie rules. The reference I thought everyone would get a lot earlier was the villain, Lord Khan, which yes, does translate to Lord. I'm very clever. Everybody thought I was doing a Star Trek reference, so nobody expected Lord Khan to be a tiger man, a Rakshasa. It's been 8 years since that campaign ended, and I'm still proud of that one. But honestly, my favorite adventure from that campaign came at about the midpoint of the story, when they visited a dwarven town, famous for its apple orchard, that was being oppressed and tormented by an evil sorceress who lived in a tower near the village. I think that adventure was really well written, and I still, every once in a while, think about taking it out and dusting it off and adapting it for 5th edition. I would run that again, maybe scale it down so it's a one-shot and make a night of it. I think that would be a lot of fun. At the end of the day, you can take inspiration from any part of any story. You shouldn't feel shackled to any elements of the story or any of the characters. While I was writing the script, I had Lilo and Stitch on in the background, because my neighbors were setting off fireworks, but if I could mask those fireworks with cartoony laser gun sounds, then my dogs wouldn't bark. And a pair of alien bounty hunters from another plane of existence could be an awesome set of villains for your D&D game. You could just easily convert Jubna and Pleakley into being members of alien cultures in D&D lore. Just going off of their appearance, Jubna lends himself really well to being a GIF, and Pleakley could just be a GIF. That's a fun joke. You could actually get a lot of mileage out of that. And hey, maybe you do the GIF-GIF joke. One of the cultures pronounces their G one way, the other pronounces it the other way. That's honestly the recipe for a session where they just make jokes the entire time and you only get through 2 sentences of your prep. That's great. As another example, you could look at the MCU, at all 23 movies of the Infinity Saga, and map them into a 20-level campaign. For example, you could open your adventure with the heroes imprisoned by bad guys and needing to find a way to escape, like Out of the Abyss. That's the first Iron Man. And at level 20, they're trying to save all of creation from a mad titan who's trying to gather a bunch of MacGuffins so we can get access to a wish spell. Those movies are designed around the franchise's power scaling and the constant heightening of the stakes, which makes them a really natural fit for a long-running D&D campaign. Also, if you want to look really clever, take inspiration from the movies that nobody remembers. Everybody loves to crap on Thor: The Dark World, but there are some set pieces in that movie that would be amazing D&D combats. And I can speak from experience. I've done it. Nobody got the reference, and I know for a fact every player at that table had watched that movie. On a related note, around the time that Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft came out, I read this banger of a tweet by Christian Hoffer. D&D campaign idea. Disney villains are Ravenloft Dark Lords. You're welcome. One of these days I'm gonna make that adventure. One of these days. And once I do, you know what online service would help me get all my thoughts in order for the campaign? Today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is an online resource that can help writers and game masters build their world and keep their campaign settings in order. You can create articles and timelines, upload and nest maps, and use random generators for inspiration. And you can run your games directly through the system. You and your players can roll dice on the website, and World Anvil has a GM screen feature. They make it as easy as possible for you to create and manage your world through the site, and to have the information at your fingertips during the game. And World Anvil has been kind enough to sponsor this video. You can sign up for World Anvil for free to get a basic account, or you can use the code SUPERGEEK to save 40% on any annual subscription. Thank you so much to World Anvil for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This was a fun video to make, and I think it could be really useful to a lot of dungeon masters out there. Now, changing topics slightly, there are times when I'll read a book or watch a movie or TV show, and I won't be inspired to lift a story beat or a monster or a villain, but instead I'll actually be inspired with a new technique that I want to use to run my games. A scene or a description will give me some form of insight that I can use to make my games better. And I've got a couple of these lined up already that I want to make videos about, so look forward to those. It's going to be fun to get these past the YouTube copyright system. If you want to support the channel, there are 4 ways to do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get alerts when new videos come out on Mondays and Thursdays. You can join my Patreon and help me reach some of the goals where I can make this channel even better. You can join my Discord and be a part of some cool conversations about cool, nerdy stuff. And you can join my newsletter and get the occasional awesome update. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.